Hi, good afternoon to you and to all participants to this webinar. That is a technical webinar on a specific topic that I believe is really important, fundamental in our sector, and that is food, food supplement, and everything that is related to this sector. During this meeting, I will pass you all the definition and the information on to understand what is a novel food, how is classified, and how we can register in FDA in order to import the product or to be used in manufacturing some product. This is the program for today. The first step is regulatory background. We will see the general overview, the law and notification, so the reference law. Then how to classify every single ingredient, because we will see that every kind of ingredient has a different, slightly different process and documentation to provide. Then we will see the practice, how we see the ingredient in the Thai FDA system. I will show you some screenshots from the system just to make you understand how FDA consider every single kind of ingredient. Then we will follow the registration procedure. We have some different cases, for example, novel ingredient, non-novel food, or food additives or probiotics. Then the process, the documentation and timelines that I'm sure is the most interesting topic for the audience. And at the end, we will have a question time where I will be glad to answer your question. And in case I won't have immediately the right answer, we can follow up by email in the next day. So let's start from the first topic. What is a novel food? Let's make a general example. Let's take the plants as example. There are nearly 7,000 species of plants around the world. And if we consider the database for Europe, for example, 30 food plants deliver the 95% of the human daily intake of calories, and around 300 other plants are delivering the remaining 5%. So 6,300 plants are not used in Europe. These 300 food are likely to be considered traditional in Europe, but they can be novel or nearly unknown in other countries. And in Asia is exactly like this. Let's start from the assumption that every geographical area considers novel what is not known and not commonly used. This is valid for any other kind of food everywhere. So our first waypoint is that what is not included in the normal diet of a given area is a novel food. Novel food is regulated already in European Community, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and some Asian countries. In specific in Thailand, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, and in Singapore, and in many other parts of the world, naturally. Everywhere the novel food they need to go through a pre-market assessment procedure, and in Thailand also, of course. How we consider new foods and novel ingredients in Thailand. New foods and ingredients are highly regulated in countries around the world, and regardless their jurisdiction, they have a specific law on the novel food. There are common regulatory approaches and practice, but even in a single region such as Southeast Asia, the rules and process can vary. So please don't expect the same rules in Thailand or in Vietnam or in the Philippines. It will be slightly different. Where the novel food is not regulated, the authority tends to wait for the approval in other regions or until a particular ingredient has been widely used in other parts of the world. Only then they will authorize its use in their countries. Apart from this approach, Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam have a well-developed regulatory regime for food, and they offer manufacturers and importers a clear chance to access local consumer and markets. In the specific Thailand, that is object of our webinar, of course, every kind of novel food and ingredient can be registered if it respects the compliance and can provide an adequate documentation on its safety. Now let's have a look at our country, Thailand, starting from its legal background. This is our basic of juristic consideration. Thailand juristic system is based on laws and subordinate legislation. We have six kind of process. One is the royal proclamation, then we have ministerial regulation, then we have orders, notification, royal decrees, and rules. In our sector, the sector depending on Thai FDA, we use only two of them. We use, of course, the law, that is the Food Act, that we'll see later, but we use mainly ministerial regulation and notification that are issued by the Ministry of Public Health. They are then enforced by the Thai FDA, that is in charge of ensuring the safety, the quality, and the efficacy of consumable products. Continuing with our regulatory background, we see that according to our scheme, the authority we have to deal talking about food are two: the Ministry of Public Health and the Food and Drug Administration, FDA. They govern completely, totally the food sector. The governing law, the law of reference in the food sector, are the Food Act that was issued in 1979, that give the general guidelines on all that is food, and all the related notification of the Ministry of Public Health. We had around 440 notifications since the day they enforced the Food Act, that was in May 1979. And we group all of them in a PDF that can be downloadable from our website. I will give you the link later on. The main instrument for food control are international standards. You see on the right side of the screen. Thailand accepts all the major international standard certification, provided that they are issued by an accredited certified body, and they must be endorsed with the stamp and signature by an authorized body. In this case, also, you can contact us to receive the list of authorized certified body accepted in Thailand, or you can browse the website of TISI, that is the Technological Institute in charge of managing the certified bodies. Okay, let's go to the next step. This is the legal frame of our topic. On the top, we have the Food Act 1979 that gives the general guidelines on food. Then we have, for our specific case, the novel ingredient, the notification number 376 that was issued in 2016 that give the details about novel food, and then many other notification give us indication for each kind of ingredient. I bring you just as example the notification on food additives that are multiple. From the first, the number 281 issued in 2004, until the last, the 418 in 2020, that we will see because it's regulating in detail the food additive, expressing the name and the allowed food additive. Any other kind of ingredient, like probiotic, like plants, like GMO, have their specific notification. Just to let you know, the last notification issued by the ministry was on June 4th, and it was defining the use of GMO on 4th of June, the number 432, if I'm not wrong. One personal comment, do not expect to find all you need when you download and study these laws. There may be other further obstacles between us and notification of our new food. For example, the interpretation of the rules, the language barriers, and the operational manuals that are available in Thai language only. So let's say the law give us a basic knowledge of what we can expect, but operative support details, and in most cases are not sustainable for a non-Thai speaker. I also want to point out that FDA system is not accessible to any foreign citizen. You must be a Thai citizen to have the authorization to enter in the system. Okay, let's go into the detail. Let's see the main law, that is the Food Act in 1979. This Food Act defines what is a food. A food is a substance, this is mentioned in section 4, a substance that can be eaten, drunk, sucked, or gotten into the body by mouth or by any other mean, no matter in what form, not including medicine, psychotropic substances, and narcotics. Or it is a substance intended to be used as ingredient in the production of food, including food additive, coloring matter, and flavoring. In section 5 that we see here in the screen, section 5 allocates the task of execution of this law to the Ministry of Public Health. In the following section of the law, we see defined the licensing process, the control, the advertisement, the labeling, and of course the penalties for offenders. Basically, this law is not strictly related to the topic of today, so we have to keep it apart. Just remember that this law exists and give us the guidelines for everything concerning the food. What is important in our case is this notification, number 376, issued in 2016. This notification defines a novel food as a substance that can be both a finished product or a single ingredient, or an innovative process to produce food. Keep this in mind because this will be important for all the duration of this webinar. At the present, these are substances which have never been consumed as food, or never been used as ingredient, as well as developing innovative process that have never been used for food production. This material or process need to provide measures for safety. This is what the notification says. Measure for safety is what we analyze today. That is our safety assessment in order to get the permit to use a specific novel food or novel ingredient. So let's see again in detail what is the real definition of novel food. Novel food is any substance used as food or any food ingredient which has been significantly used for human consumption less than 15 years, or something that has never been used, or both, one product containing either one or two. Summarizing, any food or ingredient or process to make a food which has a commercial history of less than 15 years is a potential novel food in Thailand. Let's just have a comparison between the definition of novel food in Thailand and the current definition in Europe. Why I use Europe? Because most of regulation in Thailand take inspiration from the European regulatory, and because I'm sure most of you know perfectly the regulation in Europe. So under the EU regulation, any food that was not consumed significantly prior to May 1997 is considered to be a novel food. The category covers new foods, food from new sources, new substances using food, as well as new ways and technologies for producing food. So this sounds quite similar to the Thai definition. The novel food in Thailand is an ingredient with less than 15 years of history. In Europe, they need to have 25 years. The definition, the rest of the definition is the same. But always remember that some food considered as novel in Europe can be commonly used in Thailand. I give an example that is here on the screen. The chia seed are subject to assessment in Europe, but in Thailand it's a common ingredient. It can be used freely, openly. Okay, let's give a check to the ingredients classification. How FDA consider any kind of ingredient and how we classify the food in Thailand. Just recall that according to Food Act Section 4, food is an edible item, and those principles which sustain life. The substance can be gotten into the body in any form, and there cannot be a medicine, of course, or can be an ingredient used in the production of food, including food additive, coloring matter, and flavoring. So basically, with some limited exception, like fresh fruit, fish, molluscos, etc., food is always made by ingredients. An ingredient is every substance used to produce a given food. The most common ingredient we can recall here are additives, sweeteners, enzymes, flavors, excipients. We consider ingredient only what can be traced in the finished product. In some case, in case something changes its form during the production, this won't be considered as an ingredient in the finished product. What is a food additive? We see that food additives are considered differently, and we will see later in the process of assessment. Every substance that is added to food to enhance its flavor or appearance or to preserve it is a food additive. We give an example here, some example here, like preservatives, antioxidants, emulsifier, colorants, sweeteners. All the additives are defined and named one by one by the notification of Ministry of Public Health number 418 issued in 2020 related to food additive. And we'll see in this slide, we see an example, one page, the first page of this notification. This is an extract, of course, an unofficial translation because FDA only provide documentation in Thai language. This is an extract, I say, of the notification related to food additive. For each allowed additive, we see in this table that FDA provides the INS number and, of course, the name and its synonym if there are any. And this is very important, the functional class. In this case, for example, acesulfame potassium, the allowed functional class are only as flavor enhancer and sweetener. So in case we want to use this excipient as with a different function, like for example, thickener, if this function is not enlisted here, this will be a novel ingredient, and this will be subject to the safety assessment. So this, sorry, in the second line, you can see in the column, the food category where this product is allowed. We have 13 categories of food in Thailand. Then in the third column, we see the maximum allowed use by milligram per kilo, then notes, if any, and the year that this, where this product has been allowed by a notification from the ministry. So this is a basic document for any regulatory activity. If an additive is not included in this table, as I mentioned before, it must be considered as novel, or at least it's subject to a safety assessment. This list is updated on average every couple of years. This specifically was approved in 2020, so probably this year or next year we will see a new one with the updates. Novel food or novel ingredients or novel process for to produce food shall be assessed for a safety. This page is copied from the operative manual of Thai FDA, where they define how to consider, how to apply, and what kind of process we have to follow for every single ingredient. So here we see the first difference between the two different products. A product that has no history of use as food in less than 15 years, it's a proper novel food. Then we have a class that is has been used for more than 15 years. that has been named non-novel food. This generates confusion, but unfortunately, this is the translation we need to use from the Thai language. The above list exclude the food additives, the flavoring agents, and the genetically modified organisms, and I forgot to put in this list the probiotics. And as mentioned before, the GMO are regulated by notification 431, that was the last issued by Thai FDA one month ago. Let's try to summarize. When do we need to process a safety assessment? Please keep in mind that for the entire duration of this meeting, food assessment is generally not required. It becomes necessary when the product is not in general food category, that is approved without consideration. What is the general food category? For example, is a ready-to-eat product. We don't need to process any assessment. This process is related only to labeled, standardized, or specially controlled food, exclusively when one of those following conditions is satisfied. The first condition is one or more of its ingredients are not in Thai FDA database, the case we have seen before in the food additive database. The product, as a second condition, the product has an innovative production method, never used in Thailand before. This is why normally when you submit a food, they will ask you the flow chart of production to check if this is something innovative or not. The number 3 is if one or more of its ingredients have different function than the one listed in a FDA database, as we said before for food additive. Or if the product contains a genetically modified organism, these kind of products are always subject to a safety assessment. So summarizing, is not all the products must undertake the safety assessment. Only in case of labeled food, standardized food, specially controlled food, with at least one ingredient that is not in Thai database, Thai FDA database, that is innovative, or that is genetically modified. Now, to give you a real example, we see what happened when we apply for a product. This is the Skynet. This is the homepage of the Skynet. That is the system used by Thai FDA and by all the operators. It's a practical example to understand how a given product is processed in the system. So after our operator submit the request and is authorized to enter in the system, he has a digital ID. I remind you that the operator must be a Thai citizen. It is assigned a username and a password. And when the operator enter, you see the system related to a given company. In this case, this system is authorized for food system, for medical device, for section 27, and many other that you cannot see in the screenshot. When we click on this food system, we enter in the specific data of the company. This is the address of our warehouse, for example, where we are approved. We click according to the arrow, and we enter in the system. Here we see on the left column all the product that we are allowed to submit, and with different kind of applications. Sorbor 7 is, for example, for ready-to-eat food that are not subject to any control. Sorbor 5, it's licensed or specially controlled or labeled food. And there are many others. We take an example today. We consider that we are submitting a food supplement, a dietary supplement. So we'll open the system for the dietary supplement, and following the red arrow, we can access the system for ingredient and premix. This is the database of Thai FDA. When we enter in this system, in this page, we can input and search in the database any kind of ingredient. We can provide an FDA number if we know it, or the substance name. This is open to any scientific name or common name. We can type any kind of name, or the CAS number, or the INS number, or check what if we want to use a specific part of the plant, for example. This is commonly not used. We are actually make this simulation with an ingredient named Lactobacillus plantarum. When we launch the search, this is the outcome. We see the Lactobacillus plantarum has 3 returns, 3 different substances. The first is a food additive. The use is food additive. The second and the third can be used as active ingredient. Here we have the first exceptions, because if we submit any kind of normal food, label food, we can use independently the food additive or active ingredient. But if you want to use a probiotic, lactobacillus, in a food supplement, we must use it as active ingredient. So we have 2 choices. The first one is not usable, it's not applicable. The second is name strain 299V, and the third has a number, a serial number, and an asterisk. This asterisk indicates that this product, this ingredient in this specific form, is subject to a food safety assessment. So in our case, we have to use the number 2. In case we don't have a number 2, we must submit the product for a safety assessment. So this to make you understand that anytime we need to verify if a product, an ingredient can be used, we need to simulate a submission, enter in the system, and check case by case. Let's see another case that is more common, when the ingredient can be used as ingredient and additive as well. In this case, it looks that we can proceed without any problem, but in reality, we can't. This shows you that every specific case has a different story. This ingredient that is isomalto oligosaccharide, this ingredient cannot be used as active ingredient in dietary supplement. So in this case, we need to use it as ingredient and to enlist it as an inactive ingredient. If we want to declare this isomalto oligosaccharide in a food supplement as active ingredient, we must submit the ingredient for a food safety assessment. This example that was our real case last week show us that rules are clear in theory, but then in practice, you can always find a surprise unless your consultant knows perfectly the case, because it happened already one time. Otherwise, there can be some surprise. And this surprise can be avoided only by a specific assessment on the product. The last example, that is the most common, it happened many times. We search always for a dietary supplement use. We search for a plant named Cassia acutifolia. We widen the search to Cassia, and this is all we get from the database. You see, Cassia acutifolia is not mentioned, it's not in the list. So this means that this plant cannot be used as ingredient in a dietary supplement. Or if you want to use it, you must submit the ingredient for a safety assessment. In this specific case, we had direct experience many times with this Cassia acutifolia in the last 5 years, with different customers and for many different kind of products. But none of them decided to proceed with the safety assessment, and they changed the formula. This is the easier way. And I agree, because sometimes it's not worth it to wait a long time, and we will see later the timeline for a safety assessment, if the product is not a top bestseller or if this specific ingredient doesn't make any difference in terms of marketing or against competition. So let's consider why these companies, these customers of ours, they decided to avoid the safety assessment. What are the questions we have to ask ourselves to make a decision? Why say no or say yes to novel food registration? Normally, we say yes because after the approval, the applicant shall be the sole authorized importer of the product containing such ingredients. So you will have the exclusivity unless one of your competitors go through the safety assessment as well. But, and the cost is not excessive, it's just a matter of time. We say no because the process is long, it takes a lot of resources, and the documentation we have to provide is huge, and we will see later. If you expect a huge demand for your food, or if the ingredient, as I mentioned before, can make the difference between you and the competition, this process will be a key factor for your success. So I suggest you to consider to undertake the safety assessment. So I know the topic is quite boring. Let's talk 5 minutes about marketing. I give you two examples that actual. The insects are a source of protein. In Thailand, like most of Asia, insects are not a novel food. We eat them regularly since long time, and it's a traditional food. But this doesn't mean that their use is allowed in all kinds of food. When we talk about ready-to-cook and ready-to-eat food, insects are commonly allowed, especially because there is no control. I mentioned before the SORBOR7 application. But when we talk about different use as a source of protein or coloring agent, any other use, things may be different. Some insect derivatives like carminic acid has been used since long time in Thailand and are still allowed, despite the fact that in other countries now they are banned. We use it as a food additive, but more recent ingredients coming from insects may not be allowed even here. This is one of the major battles of the future, since as we see in the table, insects give a high feed conversion efficiency and are much more eco-friendly than traditional cows, pigs, or chicken. So how can we know if a given ingredient or product should be considered novel or not containing insect? Just as I mentioned already, through a product assessment, since the variables, as I showed before in the previous slides, are multiple and somehow is not predictable. Second example is really the latest product where they are pushing now in our market in Thailand is cannabis. In the last month, in June, 9 of June 2022, the cannabis has been removed from narcotic list and it has been assigned to FDA for regulation. We have to say that the parliament is still discussing the new Cannabis Hemp Act that shall be enforced probably within next year. Actually, the use as ingredient in food is allowed in ready-to-eat food with some limitation. We can use only leaves and THC must be less than 0.2%. Actually, the use in dietary supplement is not regulated, and it is possible that cannabis will need a safety assessment in order to be used in the dietary supplement. For example, for gummies, for stripping, and in herbal products. So we are in a gray area now, and we have two choices: or we wait to the final law and cannabis will be regulated and allowed, or we enter in the assessment and we try to get the approval before the competition. This is, of course, in case someone is considering to invest in this sector, is a must-to-do registration for everyone willing to invest here. in a sector that is booming not only in Netherlands, as you will see and as you see in the table, but also in Thailand. We are now at the interesting part of our webinar, the certification process. How we apply for a novel food registration in Thai FDA. Now we will see the process divided by novel food and food additive and probiotic. The differences are slight but significant. And the first question we need to ask is who can apply? The answer is a Thai citizen or a Thai company in possess of specific requirements. So if every one of you is planning to submit one product or one food for assessment, you need to have a Thai representative. Foreigners are not allowed to operate in Thai FDA system or to be applicant in any process for submission at any level. Just to make things harder, as I anticipated before, there are more classes of novel food. According to the operative manual of Thai FDA, we have in section 3.1, we see in the screen, the real novel food. That means a new food or ingredient or a new process to obtain food with less than 15 years history. In section 3.2, we have the so-called non-novel food, that in summary are food or ingredients or processes with more than 15 years history that simply are not yet into the Thai FDA database. So let me try to clarify and to focus on two things. If you remember at the beginning of the webinar, we mentioned that in the world there are 7,000 plants. We have in Thai FDA database 244 plants listed and authorized. This means that limitation for specific product coming from remote geographical areas that are remote for Thailand, of course, not for you maybe, we have some limitation. We cannot expect to find, for example, that an alga growing in a specific area of a lake in Siberia could be known in Thailand. So this shall be considered as a novel ingredient. But on the other side, and this is point 2, if this specific alga has in Siberia and in some other countries like Europe or America, a real history of usage and safety, it can be considered as a non-novel food, and its assessment shall be easier. All we need to do is prove that somewhere that food has been used for a long time with no adverse event. Normally, the Thai FDA accepts any data from a relevant and credible agency, and we will see now in detail. The step of the process. This is a process in 2 steps. The safety assessment is a process in 2 steps. One is the evaluation performed by a risk assessment center, and the second is the submission to Thai FDA. Whatever may be the classification, real novel or non-novel food, the registration is always following this 2-step process. First, so we undergo to an evaluation of safety, then we submit the result for this evaluation to Thai FDA, of course, with additional documentation. The first step is submission to a risk assessment center that must be in the list of FDA recognized laboratory. Actually, we have 4 different institutions that are authorized for such a task. You see enlisted here, the Bureau of Food Quality and Safety in the Department of Medical Science, that is the one we normally use, the Institute of Food in the Ministry of Industry, the Thailand Risk Assessment Center, TRAC, and the Center for Nutrition Assessment and Health Claims of Food Products. Normally, your local consultant, even in our case, will choose the best institute for your case and submit the documentation for the assessment. the minimum timeline for this step is 90 business days. It varies between the different institutions. The minimum is 90 days. The maximum is 12 months, depending on the institute. In case of non-novel food, with the history more than 15 years, less documentation is required, but the time is the same. After we get a positive evaluation from the Thai Institute, the second step is totally documentary. The documentation, together with a letter from the institution which performed the safety assessment, will be submitted to Thai FDA for their final evaluation. This final evaluation is taken by a committee and usually take maximum 40 days. So we can say that in total, the process for a novel food registration take around 6 months in a straightforward case. Please, you have to consider also that your consultant will take long time to prepare the dossier, considering that it must be adapted to Thai formats. Normally, the documentation in English language is accepted, but the format must be typically Thai. I will show you now what we have to do. These are requirements for both kind of safety assessment, for any kind of product. But this is the document that your consultant will ask you to provide. This is not the final submission. Of course, this is a generic list that may change also according to the specification and the risk of the food. But again, generally speaking, if a manufacturer can provide this level of documentation, and you can read what is required, the process may be successful. Just to make you understand what there is in the backside of the process, of this process, I will show you in the next slide the document your consultant will submit to FDA. It's really different. Yes, this is because you will deliver to your regulatory consultant, and he will need to adapt, as I mentioned before, to put in the correct form, follow the scheme provided by the FDA. In this sector, your consultant is not only executing, not limit his role to collect document and submit, but you will need to work together with the consultant. Let's see what he will need, how he will need to transform your documents. This is the detailed request of documentation to assess both novel and non-novel food. It's the same. It looks surprising, but in case of non-novel, we can bypass some questions. And furthermore, in some cases, the answer to a question, to a single point, can be yes or no, a simple yes or no, or just a data, or just a number. But in other cases, we need to provide studies and documentation from credible institutions to confirm the safety or the history of our food or our ingredient. What is a credible institution? We use this formula many times already. Who is considered credible by Thai FDA? Generally speaking, is a matter of standard. Remember, I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, which are the accepted standards. It's a matter of standard, but also certification and scientific authority. We can say in detail, and based on an official seminar that we attended, that this can be the guideline to choose documentation for a safety assessment. So let's take a look to the institutions that are considered credible, like laboratory analysis that are covered by the correct ISO certification. Or the assessment from international agencies such as JECFA, or academic journals, or research papers, or toxicological studies by World Health Organization, or from ICH, or again, reliable journals, academic journals listed in international trusted databases, or scientific opinion and listed in Codex, EFSA, etc., etc., etc. For adverse health effect, we have to provide data that are credible again and issued by official institution. I think for this topic we clarify what you have to provide and what is accepted in Thai FDA. Let's talk about probiotics for a while. This is another case in the category of food assessment for food, novel or non-novel. The required documentation for probiotic is much less than other ingredients, as you can see. It's only in 15 points. We don't enter in the specific case, we don't check every single voice, but you will have it downloadable from the website, so you can access the data, or you can contact us for any follow-up. But it is now my intention to inform you that the process is variable according to the specification and the function of the food. So now let's go to the last topic before the conclusion, the safety assessment for food additive. As we mentioned before, food additive is a part of ingredient, but have a different treatment, a different process. This is the process. The process is quite the same as per food. We need first to submit the product to a risk assessment center recognized by Thai FDA. They will evaluate and they will issue a letter. The only difference is that now for this kind of product, we have 5 centers authorized for the assessment instead of 4 that we can use for food. We have an additional option that is MSTDA that is added to the previous list. The rest of the process is the same. After we get the approval from the Risk Assessment Center, we have to submit to the FDA, and they submit to the committee for a final approval, or can happen rejection or request for further clarification. In case of food additive, these are the required documentation. I divided in 2 pages. This is the first page. As you can see, it's slightly different, but based on the same principle. The documentation consists of information that can normally be easily provided by manufacturer, and in studies and queries from scientific database that need to follow the principle we spoke about, the credibility. So we can collect data from the internet, but we must be sure that the source is credible. This is the second part of the required documentation for food additives. Normally even this data can be collected by medical journals, scientific database on the web. The important is, again, the source has an accreditation for what they prove. Normally, self-assessment, manufacturer declaration, and in some cases, even in-house tests are not acceptable or sometimes tolerated, but better to use something more official. Well, we come to the conclusion. I hope I gave you a general landscape of today's topic, that is understanding the requirement of new food ingredients and additive registration in Thailand. We can summarize. Normally, the timeline is 6 months, around that. Different procedure according to the different form of ingredient, but the process is very similar and it's always in 2 steps. I apologize if I was boring, but this is a technical matter and often generates confusion. We receive a lot of inquiries and it's difficult to understand at the first sight what we have to do and what the customer, what our manufacturer have to do. I hope I give you a clearer vision on the topic, and I'm available, of course, for any clarification now in question time, and in the next day by email through our host, Ken Linked, that I want to thank, and now it's time. It's your time. Please submit questions or any requests for clarification. Thank you.